So hey everybody, my name is Jim Jones. I am a product architect, actually with a lot of words, but I will just go product architect at a company called 1111 Systems. We're a cloud services provider out of Texas, New York, pretty much all over the globe. And today I'm going to talk to you about my premise is InfoSec and backups are the same thing. So I'm going to be the backup guy speaking at the security conference. This is how this rolls. So how did I get here? Well, Patrick clicked my screen and he threw off my clicker. Not cool. All right, so what is a product architect? In short, I'm a lab nerd and I like to write a lot of things. So essentially I help define our products specifically around data protection, so the security side of things as well as backup. As far as school, I actually went not to Mountwest, but to Marshall Community and Technical College under Scott, Nicholas here. And then went on, got my RBA at Marshall and my master's from Maryland in IT, specializing in security. I've made a focus being community-oriented in my career. What that means is that I'm an outward nerd. You know, as I've said from time to time, I'm not a player, but I tweet a lot. And you know, it's taken me places, got me places in my career. So if you are not like socially active in being through your learning process, might be a good idea because it can help you do a lot of things. One of the ones you see here listed is AWS Community Builder. To that note, I hate to listen to myself talk and I love questions and interaction. So to further you on that, I've got AWS credits. So you ask questions, you get credits to go have your own compute on AWS. If you guys want to find me after the fact, my website's koolaid.info and I'm Kool-Aid IT on pretty much every social platform. Well, no, I can't even say that.
Takes me back.
So Twitter, I'm not on TikTok, but Twitter, Blue Sky, LinkedIn, GitHub, you name it. But so like I said, today we're going to talk about backups and how they relate to IT. Wow, that came out weird when it went on the screen. So if you're here, this is a security conference or a cybersecurity conference. You might be a student already thinking about cybersecurity, doing things like that. The fun things that you guys are hearing about or maybe learning about, like pen testing or SIM, SOAR, firewalls, threat intelligence, red teaming, zero trust, all that, that's one side of IT, okay? That's the proactive or the reactive. I'm gonna go look for these hackers that are gonna do these things. But the reality of it is a lot of times those hackers are actually successful. And so when those hackers are successful is when my side of the shop kind of comes into thing that we think about what's called BCDR, or business continuity and disaster recovery. It used to be we did DR because of what I always call fire, flood, and blood. My building's burned down. A flood's come through. The city of Charleston has decided to wash away all their water and now my building doesn't exist anymore. That's why we did IT. Now it's all InfoSec, okay? So somebody has a security event, we get involved, and we get involved on the other side doing backups, replications, offsite copies, testing those backups to make sure they'll work, things like that. And then in the middle, we meet, okay? So as you're working in InfoSec, you're thinking about, you know, is there an issue in my network? Is there an issue on my systems? Well, those backups 9 times out of 10 are gonna be the first line of defense where the response engineers are trying to figure out, okay, what happened? We're gonna take those backups and we're gonna analyze those for vulnerabilities. We can also help with attack mitigation, say, okay, so this is what's happened. And then finally, we get very involved. We are the people that do recovery. So as those systems have been infected and they come back and they go down, we're the people that help bring that stuff up. So that's definitely it's all one big part of creating data protection. And so what drives that in, you know, there's lots of hacking. You know, you guys have all maybe seen the movie Hackers, or you've seen Swordfish, or any of these fun, or all the other fun movies. So it's all kinds of things, but since effectively the pandemic started, the driver has been ransomware, and it sucks. It sucks so bad you guys don't even know. I will full disclose that I've not been at a company that got hacked, but I started at a company that got full globally ransomwared 1 hour after it happened. It wasn't me, just to be clear, I wasn't the person that did it. So the first day of my working for this company lasted for about 3 months. I slept 2 hours a night as we did global recovery of over 3,000 VMs. So that was a lot of fun. Who here knows what ransomware is? Okay. All right. So ransomware is when you get attacked and somebody goes through a number of things and infects your systems and then encrypts all the data in it. And as you can see a little bit here, this is actually a ransom note that was left on somebody's computer. And effectively says, we've locked all your stuff down. If you want a snowball's chance in hell of ever getting that back, pay us money through Bitcoin and we'll give you the decryption key. 9 times out of 10, that decryption key doesn't work. Okay? So this is why we back up, so we can get around those issues. And they target the backup applications themselves. They go through and as part of their playbooks, delete the backups to try to force you to pay the ransom. And this is happening all the time. So let's, I'm a bit of a numbers person, so I'm going to talk about numbers a little bit. So again.
Now companies are even buying ransomware insurance.
Oh yeah, so a lot of drivers, so everybody hears about InfoSec jobs and how much you get paid and all that kind of stuff. The reason why there are so many InfoSec jobs and why everybody gets paid so well is we have an entire industry called cyber insurance that almost every company of any size, and especially if you're any form of regulatory, if you work for a bank, if you work for a government organization, if you work for a healthcare, you are all mandated to have cyber insurance. And the cyber insurance companies will dictate what you have to do to protect your data. That can be, let's make sure on the InfoSec side that your production data is always encrypted. It can also mean that you have to have so much backups. They have to be in these places. These backups have to look like this. It's all part of that. So it really forces the hand of companies to make jobs like this exist and continue to exist. But as we talk about ransomware, it's just got worse and worse. So ransomware really kind of came to be about 2010. It kind of bubbled up and it was a thing that was there. It was a thing that we talked about for like a decade. And then the pandemic hit and 2 things happened all at once. Everybody started working remotely, so a lot of these very closed data centers that the world had all became cloud opened in some way, shape, or form because everybody was working remote. At the exact same time, you started seeing a lot of these nation states that were strong in cybersecurity, but were weak in having funding, empower and effectively create their own hacking groups to go through and be able to ransom other companies in other places. So we see North Korea a lot. We see Russia a lot. A lot of these groups are actually, and we see China a lot. A lot of these places these ransomware gangs are actively sponsored by the nations they work in. North Korea's army is funded by ransomware attacks in large extents. So as I said, it's grown. So as you can see from the numbers, 2023 is 5,300 known global ransomware attacks. The next year it's up to 6,100. Just through 3 months of this year, we're already at 1,800 known attacks. If you guys are ever bored and just want to do doom scrolling, that's the most fun and time-wasting thing ever. This website, ransomware.live, is actually run by a buddy of mine, and he actually taps into a lot of different data sources and has actual notes. He has statistics. He has the conversations between hackers and companies as they negotiate how much they're going to pay. It's just the coolest thing ever, and I really enjoy it. But this is a global problem. It happens everywhere. This big blue box is the United States, or excuse me, this is the other. The 22 up there is in the United States, but it literally happens in every country and every portion of the world. And it happens across all industries. So as we look at this, so you'll see 27% is government, 5% is business services. There's a lot of tech, which is the 11. So regardless of what kind of company you end up working in, let's say you're going to go into IT, wherever you work, it may happen, okay? And this is going to be a thing that's going to be part of why you do what you do. And so how does this actually happen? Let's look at what happens. This isn't just a, I'm going to do one thing. Ransomware itself is not the hack. Ransomware is the output that comes from it. An actual ransomware attack starts 9 times out of 10 with social engineering and LinkedIn. They go out and look at a company that they think that they might target, and that target may come because they looked on Shodan.io and looked for a particular vulnerability that was known across the internet. And as they scan, they found those systems in a company. They reach out to somebody on LinkedIn that might be IT director, or it might be, whatever, and try to phish credentials off of them. Who here knows what a phishing is? Okay, define it.
Phishing attack is essentially they will send emails to people, and they will act like, they'll act like, hey, for example, one of them is, like, you might get an email and they'll say your account's locked down. Mm-hmm. And, if you click on this link that I've included in this email, I'll unlock your account.
Yep.
Or I'll protect your account. And what they're really trying to do is gain your trust in order to betray it almost instantly. Mm-hmm. They just want your data.
Yep.
So,
yeah, it's to be able to extract credentials or maybe find out where systems are. So get you a little cloud action going on. Okay, so then once that happens, they know there's vulnerabilities that come out every day, if not every hour. They know to look for those kind of vulnerabilities, and they will execute on them. And then a lot of times, it's just human error. You guys will hear about firewalls here and there. Does anybody know what TCP 3389 is? See, no, you got it? That's the one. It is the 7th circle of hell and the thing that all of us should hate on earth. So it's a great thing. It makes it easy. You can get in and you can get into your remote computer, but it's horribly protected, okay? So lots of people will turn on 3389 on their firewall to give you a backdoor to remote into your own network if you need it. Once they figure out the credentials from the social engineering, or maybe they've put a keylogger on somebody's computer through a remote vulnerability, they use that 3389 to gain access to the network. Once that happens, they'll try to elevate the credentials, and then they can see everything. And the actual commit kits that you use to execute ransomware, to go through and to encrypt all these diverse systems, they're just bought kits. You buy them on the dark web. There's a bunch of different variants out there, all from different crews. They get weird. And some of them are better than others, but, it just depends on which one you want to use a lot of times. And now as we get into 2025, we're seeing AI be involved in a lot of them. So they want to make the actual attack morph so you can't track it, so the antiviruses won't pick up on it, or, whatever systems. And that helps with that. So, we talked a little bit about here's the multi-pronged attacks. In terms of a playbook, what does it look like in reality? Okay, we talked about the credentials. We're going to steal credentials. We're going to do inventory. The next step is the one that's one of the more recent wrinkles to it, because they figured out that backups themselves are helping a lot of companies get restored without having to pay the ransom. Well, their goal is to get you to pay that ransom. So the second step is they're going to exfiltrate your data first. They're going to go through and after they've gained access to the systems, maybe they've owned everything, they've got everything in place on all of those systems, they're going to look at what systems you have, what critical data, especially what you have that's identifiable about your customers, and they're going to suck that back out to the cloud, so that they have a copy of it. Then they're going to start trying to remove protections, okay? They want to delete backups. They want to remove any kind of antivirus that you've got, anything. So these first two steps, those can take literally weeks to occur. It's not uncommon for the initial access into your systems to happen, and then the actual attack to begin being 30, 45 days later, because they're doing inventory, they're exfiltrating data, they're identifying systems, all that kind of stuff. But 3 through 5 happens real fast, or 3 and 4 happen very fast. They'll start removing all those protections, getting rid of the backups, and then they start globally encrypting all at once, okay? 9 times out of 10, what they do is now, when they encrypt your system, they put a text file in every folder that they encrypt, and it'll be the ransom note. the company that I helped clean up, part of it was going through and deleting. The number was in the millions of these little text files that we had to delete. And we had customer data that was in there as well, that a few of them got missed by one of our other engineers, and the customers went to connect and they saw the ransom note. We were open with them, but that was not good for our own company's reputation. So as that encryption happens, once that's done, you give the ransom and off you go. Now, is anybody here aware that MGM Resorts and Caesars Palace in Las Vegas got hacked last year? Mm-hmm. So this is my favorite, the newest wrinkle and one of my favorite things. So what they did is they flipped 4 and 5. So they did the whole attack. They got all the way through. They owned every system that these 2 resorts had. MGM, which is like 10 resorts in Las Vegas, and then Caesars, which is like 3. And before they hit the ransom button, they sent them a note that said, come into this chat room and talk to us. We own everything you've got. And effectively told them, now is the time, pay us money or we're going to execute this attack. Caesars actively began talking to them, and for the low price of $3 million, not only were able to stop the attack and not be encrypted and take down all their core critical systems, but was also able to know how they got attacked in the first place, what holes they poked through, and have those, they literally closed the holes as they walked out the door. MGM ignored them, and they got full-on encrypted. Every one of their hotels, and more importantly, their casinos, think of all those electronic slot machines you see on TV, all of those were down and encrypted. They had screens on social media everywhere of all these slot machines that had the encryption, had the ransom note up on the screen. And in the end, it took them 2 weeks to be able to put another customer into their hotel. It took them 3 months to fully get casino operations back up and running. And it was 3 years or 2 years before they were able to be fully cleaned out. And it cost them almost $4 billion to do the full clean out. So we're going to see this more and more because we've seen how that works. So how do we do this in practice? Okay, so we've talked about the backup and how we're going to protect against these things. What does that actually look like? So the first thing is doing your homework. Okay, so with data protection, if you're thinking about it as an engineer that works for a company, you've got to do your pre-work first. You have to know what you have to protect. Okay, your modern organization may have 1,000 VMs, and within that you've got 150 applications of varying levels of criticality. Okay, so you've got to know what those applications are. You got to know what your systems are. Post-COVID, we all just exploded and everything went everywhere. It used to be, okay, everything I've got runs in this one little data center. It's all VMware. I know everything that I've got. Now it's VMware, it's AWS, it's Azure, it's Google Cloud, might be a little bit of stuff over here in Linode. It can be all over the place. You need to know what that is, and you need to know what data you have, okay? Because all of those are gonna have different level requirements of protection, okay? So then you need to determine your RPO and RTO. So this is like super bonus question. Does anybody know what RPO or RTO is? Okay, so it's recovery point objective. So that means at any point in time, let's say I have an email system that my company runs on, okay? If I lose emails, so if I have an event happen and I have to restore to yesterday, am I okay for that application to have potentially a 23-hour hole where I've lost that data? Okay? For email, sure, that's probably fine. For a database system that runs a hospital, probably not. Okay? That might be people's x-rays, that may be the monitoring for somebody's, health data, all that fun stuff. This stuff matters. It matters if you have an online website. You've lost 23 hours of orders, okay? And then recovery time objective. If this thing goes down, how long do I have to get it back up? Okay, so again, that database system, or if it's an ordering system, you may want that up in 5 minutes or less. That's actually possible, okay? But you've got to prioritize And maybe the other half of that would be, I've got this monitoring system that's over here that just monitors my own systems. Well, that I can have that back in a day. Okay, so you need to identify those things. And then design is always based on three things. You need security first. You always think about that. Then you think about your requirements. These are the compliance things, that cyber insurance stuff that we were talking about. And then the counterbalance to all those things, I don't care who you are or what company you work for, the counterbalance is always budget. Okay, how much money can I get to do these things? Because I can do anything you want. It just depends if you're willing to pay for it. All right, and so now that we've done the pre-work, how are we going to do it? Okay, so when we talk about budget, or when we talk about backup continuity and disaster recovery, the shorthand that we all love to use is 3-2-1. Okay, so that means 3 copies of your data. So you have your production system that's running. You have a backup that's local, so I'm backing it up right there. That's for the, oh crap, I ran a Windows update and now it's blue screened. I want to bring it right back. And then a third copy would be an off-site copy of your data. 2 different media types, okay? This used to mean, as when I first got into working about this kind of stuff in the olden days, I have a copy on disk and I have a copy on tape. Now today it's the on disk and then it's in the cloud, okay? And then 1 copy is off-site and it's encrypted, okay? Anytime we deal with backup data or any kind of large-scale data, we always want that data encrypted now because of that exfiltration problem. The backups are the double-edged sword. If we don't encrypt our backups, we talked about exfiltration. Backup is really just a big giant zip file, if you will, of entire systems, okay? Think of it as like a multi-terabyte zip file. And if my goal was to exfiltrate your systems to own it, if you didn't encrypt those backups, well, I don't even have to gather that stuff. I just say, give me that and suck it down and now it's mine, okay? So in the modern world, we're expanding 3-2-1 to 3-2-1-1-0. And this is a little bit of architecture. So we want 1 copy to be air-gapped. Does anybody here know what air-gap means? Okay, so air-gap means that I want 1 copy that no matter what, somebody either can't get to it at all or they can't delete it. It's impossible to delete, okay? With the idea being that they can't go out and just nuke your protections from orbit. Does that make sense? And then the last one is 0 errors in your backups, okay? I'm gonna make Scott cringe and say the words backup exec. For the longest time, that was the product that everybody used for this kind of thing. And I don't know that I've ever in my life seen a backup exec backup actually come through without any warnings at all. And that was before you could do verification. Now we can, we don't want to see any errors there. Okay, and so taking that into the next step of like cyber resilience or of architecture. So we talk about cyber resilience. That's the modern way of, 3-2-1 was the old way we talked about it. 3-2-1-1-0 is next. Now everybody talks about cyber resilience. And this is where we're going to marry InfoSec with data protection and BCDR. So it's going to start with, we want to monitor and actively defend that production data. So all that stuff that's happened in the other sessions you're going to talk about here, that OSINT, that firewall protection, all that kind of stuff, we want a nice layered defense of all those production systems. Then we want to have a well-architected data protection strategy. That's where we do that pre-work that we talked about a minute ago and actually lay the groundwork before we know what we're doing. Then when we start talking about that offsite, that 2 and that 1 and the 2 and the 1 and the 3-2-1-1-0, we want 1 copy to be offsite, encrypted, and here's a fun word that put it in your lexicon if you're going to do this in anger, is immutable, okay? We talked about that air gapped. Air gap could be a tape that you literally have in a box underneath your bed if you're a man of a certain age that did IT. More likely today, it's going to be immutable object storage, okay? So you set a bit on any block that you write to it that says, until this date, this data cannot be deleted in any way, shape, or form. So if an attacker gets to you, can get into your systems and they try to delete your backups, it'll just come back and say no. The system won't let it happen. Then because we care about the low RTO stuff, the stuff that has to come back in like 5 minutes, that's when we start talking about replication. So this is another portion, backups is a quick shorthand. Replica means I can take a machine and throw it to another cloud or to another system somewhere else, And with a button push, all it does, it spins it up immediately. It's not like I've got to transfer data or transform it to make it do things. It's already in the native state to make it work. And the final part is you've got to validate. I'm famous. One of my favorite things to say is untested backups is just large scale junk data. If you haven't tested your backups, it's not a backup. Okay? So you've got to do all of those things. So I'm going to go full on nerd for you guys for a hot second. Keep in mind, this is what I do for a living. So I do a lot. So I think about this stuff a lot. I've said it. So if you're going to be doing backups, and this actually applies to you in your own personal life as well. So object storage is cheap. Like for example, my company sells it for $7 a month per terabyte. Okay? So you can use it. You can turn on immutability. Leverage that immutability wherever you can. If you're backing up like your own laptop, get you a Carbonite contractor, get you a Backblaze, something like that. Or I can hook you up with free backup software if you guys don't have it already that can leverage those things. Every time you write backups, always encrypt them. It used to be when we did on-prem backups, we never encrypt on-prem because it, quote unquote, took more space and it slows things down, or it used to. That's no longer the case. With exfiltration being a part of the playbook now, we need to encrypt everywhere. In terms of that retention, we talked about those ransomware attacks being latent and dwelling for a period of time. They'll attack and then they wait while they're doing the inventory and stuff like that. And then at the very last thing they actually execute, try to maintain 30 to 90 days of backups if you can, and then use long-term retention for compliance if it's dictated. The nice lady from Digit 3 is into compliance, and she'll tell you all about those fun things. Yeah, and a lot of times they'll dictate, you've got to say, if I'm in a certain industry, I used to work for the Housing Development Fund in Charleston, and anytime you applied for a loan, we were required to hold onto those loan documents for 25 years. So that was a fun thing. So you've got to, make sure you've got your backups that last as long as your compliance is required, okay? That backup infrastructure, guess what? A lot of it still runs on Windows. Okay, it's wild. It's all moving to Linux now and becoming isolated, what's called appliances. But even then, every operating system has its holes. You can't create the perfect mousetrap because somebody's always trying to hack it. So as best you can, keep that backup infrastructure isolated. If you're, as you're doing networking, you're thinking about networking, have a separate subnet, which is where you put your backup repositories. And then isolate it to where only the backup controller servers are the only thing that can talk to it. We talked about that pre-work. Don't do this in a silo. So many times I talk to CIOs or IT managers and stuff like that. I was like, well, how's your backups? And they're like, they're great. I love them. I'm like, okay, what are you backing up? Everything. I'm backing up, because we're writing to dev null. No. We're backing up all the things. Well, what's your RTO? Well, we just decided it should be 24 hours. And then you go walk across the hall and talk to their CFO. And it's like, well, how long can you be down if your financial systems are down? About 30 minutes. And so you've got to disconnect. As you're thinking about your backups, you've got to ask the stakeholders. You cannot design, we're techie people. What you'll find is the more you get into IT, the more ego you've got. But you can't do this on your own, and you don't want to do it in a vacuum. You have to get external input. AI, I'm not the biggest proponent. I'm not the person that's going to stand up here and like Mark Cuban and tell you, drop everything and learn AI. Most of the AI that's out there is crap. It's really good at generating images, but it's already derivative and it's already learning from itself. And it's like, if you've ever watched the movie if you've not watched the movie Idiocracy, watch it now, because AI will lead us down that road, because you're going to start learning from derivative works. And when the computer gets involved, all it's going to do is spit out garbage. But where AI is actually very handy right now is in threat detection and the identification of vulnerabilities and stuff like that. All of these vendors that are out there for backup and data protection, Veeam, Cohesity, Rubrik, Veritas, all of these companies, they're all starting to leverage AI, and what they're doing with it is really smart. They're effectively saying, look, we don't want to know your data. We're not going to leech it so that you can search it and have Copilot give you back an answer. But what we want to know is, hey, we've got an idea of everything that you've got going on, and these are all the normal patterns for things, but this thing is jumping up and looking really silly. Let's flag that and send that over to the InfoSec systems that we have, our SIMs or our syslogging facilities, or put it into the SOAR or identify our antivirus software that we see this thing and have it go do another look. And that's where I come to the last thing is let's integrate that backup with security tools, okay? Every system that I work with today, yeah, I'm getting close, guys, I'm sorry, but I'm almost done. We'll get in and work with it. And so finally, let's talk about the last part, which is recovery, okay? So we've done backup, we've done replicas, we've done all that fun stuff. We need to recover. We need to know how to recover. We need to know how to prioritize. We know how to create the run book to be able to say, okay, when you have a situation where you have to recover is one of the scariest minutes of your life, or probably days of your life. And so pre-planning, doing testing, and developing a run book will actually get you through that. So you have just a thing you can pull out that says, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. And it will really accelerate that process. One of the neat new things that we see in the world is something called clean room recovery. Okay, so I keep in mind, your core systems, they're now owned. You don't trust them, okay? You don't know what's bad, what's good, what's everything. So this might be your production data. Here comes Hacker Man doing his fancy thing, and now he's encrypted all of your laptops, okay? We figure out what recovery point is before when you were hacked, and we isolate that. And then what we can do is we can create a clean room, which is effectively an isolated network that mimics your production system, recover those applications into that clean room, and then leverage our security tools to go through and say, hey, that ransomware consultant that we hired that came in and identified how we got ransomware, what the attacks were used, we're going to go specifically target those, make sure that these applications and data are clean, and only once that's done, we're going to put them back into prod, okay? So we aren't, every time with IT, you'll hear the term garbage in, garbage out a lot. So what we want to make sure is that we're not getting garbage in and shoving it back into prod when it may still have a latent attack still present there. We're going to clean it up first and then push it back. And with that, I really rushed through that last little bit. That's the end. So I always put my presentation materials out on a GitHub repo. So if any of this was interesting to you, or if you want to learn more about this stuff, scan the QR code and go grab it. If you have questions, you have comments, if you're thinking about jobs, 1111 Systems is hiring for InfoSec, network, cloud, you name it. Hit me up. Kool-Aid.info is my website. And then, like I said, Kool-Aid IT everywhere. And with that, I say thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Cool.